Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. And today let's discuss some of Nintendo and how they fit into the next generation. So with last week's confirmation from Sony that their next console will in fact be the PlayStation 5 to pretty much no one's surprise, and their confirmation that they're going to be releasing the PlayStation 5 in holiday of next year, so literally 1 year from now, it got me thinking about the fact that the next generation really is creeping up on us. We know that we can expect the Xbox Scarlet a year from now. We know now that the PlayStation 5 can also be expected at that same time, which of course leaves Nintendo in the unique position that they usually find themselves in, where we're not quite sure exactly what their game plan is. The Switch is only creeping up on its third year on the market. There's been rumors about a Switch Pro or some sort of upgrade. They recently released the Nintendo Switch Lite, and with the next gen looming, does that necessarily change or impact what they might be doing? I've obviously discussed this kind of topic a few times before, but given that over the course of the past few months, we've had the confirmation of the Xbox Scarlet next year, now with the confirmation of the PlayStation 5 that same time, we suddenly have a bigger and better picture, a clearer picture, I should say, of that kind of next-gen window. And so with this new information, it kind of changes, I think, how I can kind of dig into this topic and this conversation of how Nintendo is going to basically fit in to the next generation. Because whether we like it or not, or whether we're even ready for it or not, the next generation is coming, and really the next Xbox and the next PlayStation will be the consoles and the machines that will take the console market into the next generation. Now, obviously things are tricky because of how Nintendo and the Switch specifically fit into the current generation. You know, we all know how the Wii U released in 2012 and technically kicked off the 8th generation and was initially something that was competing directly with the current PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. But over the course of the past few years, that's obviously changed. And so with Nintendo releasing their successor to the Wii U in March of 2017, they essentially kind of split right down the middle the life cycle of the Xbox and PlayStation. And so they have this sort of like mid-generation upgrade or mid-generation evolution into their next-generation console, their 9th generation console, I should say. But the rest of the industry effectively just remained where it's at. I mean, we did get the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X, which were small iterative jumps over those current machines, but overall, really, Sony and Microsoft has remained within the same 8th generation that kicked off with Nintendo and the Wii U in 2012. And so the waters get a little bit muddy when you start to kind of figure out what's going on there. And I know a lot of people might want to say that the next gen has already started because Nintendo released their 9th generation Nintendo Switch already. And while I get the sentiment, and obviously with Nintendo being pretty much my favorite company and the Switch being my favorite console in the market, I want to kind of see things that way, but I think that if I'm being true and honest with myself and just logically looking at the situation, I can't yet say that the video game industry and the hobby of gaming has moved effectively into the next generation. It just hasn't done it. Simply because when you look at what the Wii U is capable of doing, and then you look at the jump into what the Switch is capable of doing, the Switch, as much as I love it, again, reminder, my favorite console on the market, it's still, even with that jump from Nintendo's 8th generation to 9th generation machine, it still doesn't quite match the overall capabilities of the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. And it's okay to admit that, and it's okay for the Switch to be that way because it obviously doesn't hold the Switch back. I mean, the Switch is an amazing machine that's playing and running fantastic games. It has beautiful graphics. It has the best library on the market, obviously, because it has Nintendo's games, and it's been selling like crazy. So it's not that it's... I think that some people who really love Nintendo might feel like that's a disparaging comment to say that the Switch isn't as capable or to say that their 9th generation machine hasn't moved us into the next generation. But it's not a disparaging comment, really. It's more just a matter-of-fact observation. There's nothing negative being stated here. So I know that sometimes people get really sensitive with their feelings and they feel like it's an attack on their gaming fanship, and it's just simply not. I think it's okay to look at what the Switch is and acknowledge it for what it is, and then look at the industry and say, hey, we're not yet in the next generation because the Switch didn't move technology and the overall industry and game developers forward into the next generation. We need to wait for the next jump. And really just by coincidence more than anything, it happens to be Microsoft and Sony that will be making that jump that will move the entire industry forward. And so, how does Nintendo fit into this? Well, it really kind of brings me back to some concepts and theories that I've brought up numerous times in the past. And it's the fact that I think that Nintendo will allow for Sony and Microsoft to launch their next generation machines next year, and we'll see the overall industry move into newer capabilities and newer hardware that are doing things previously that were impossible, at least for home consoles. You know, the PC market kind of changes, muddies things up a little bit, but when we're really looking at the home console stuff, you know, the next Xbox and the next PlayStation are going to move us into that kind of new era. And as we move into that new era, I think Nintendo will take a sideline, kind of sidestep, and just kind of wait and see how things are playing out, watch and observe what Sony and Microsoft do, what their systems are doing, how people react to them, how they're selling, what the games are looking like, what kinds of games are third-party developers making for these consoles, because that's a huge reason why Nintendo's going to want to move forward soon. And they'll probably formulate their plan at that time. I mean, you know, all that still being said, we can't forget that Nintendo is still most likely even working right now on that next generation hardware. So they already have some sort of vague blueprint of where they're going after the Nintendo Switch without question. And so maybe they can more start to form that into something that's going to be tangible and real once they see the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlet launch. And like I said, observe all of those things. How are the sales? How are the games? How is the graphics and power and all that different stuff? And so with that information, Nintendo might realize what and when they need to do it. But of course, the Switch Pro could also change this a little bit, because there is a reason to potentially believe that Nintendo, if they're working on a Switch Pro, that they're going to want to release this close to the launch of the the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlet. They might want to do that around, I don't know, September or October next year. You know, maybe undercut those other consoles by a month or two. And so we start to get to the holiday of 2020, and in October, Nintendo puts out a Nintendo Switch Pro that could do who knows kind of what stuff. And then the following month in November, we might also see a PS5 and an Xbox Scarlet. So the Switch Pro, if it's real, which again, I want to believe, but we still don't have anything concrete, a Switch Pro could effectively be something Nintendo puts out on the market just to kind of keep themselves a little bit more relevant in the conversation, so that the new next generation hardware from Sony and Microsoft don't completely steal the thunder and completely bury Nintendo in the conversation and in the industry. And so that's what I think a Switch Pro could help achieve. Now, there's another possible outcome here as the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlet launch, and it's Breath of the Wild 2. There is reason to believe that Breath of the Wild 2 is closer to being done than we maybe realize, and that it could be one of the perfect foils Nintendo could have to sort of stave off the onslaught of the next generation machines from Sony and Microsoft. I think that releasing a title of that caliber and that magnitude could definitely help keep Nintendo going throughout that time, and it be Nintendo's sort of direct, smaller answer to next generation hardware from the competition. And that would be great. We'd all love it. We'd all freak out. And it would be really interesting to see how everything would play out with a new Zelda and a new PlayStation and a new Xbox all hitting the market around the same time. It would be pretty crazy, man. It would feel like a war zone out there, which is in some ways kind of, you know, freaky, and you get kind of worried how things are going to go, but in other ways is also kind of exciting. But at the end of the day, Breath of the Wild 2 or a Switch Pro aside, I think the long-term plan is going to be for Nintendo to move on to their next generation machine sooner than later. Which goes back to what you guys have heard me say in the past. I feel like the Nintendo Switch only has about another 3 or so years in it. And that might seem soon to a lot of people, but I think that it's going to give us a 5 to 6 year lifespan for the Nintendo Switch. I think that that makes sense. Nintendo's hand was kind of forced so that they had to release a newer machine earlier in the life cycle of the Wii U than I'm sure that they wanted to. You know, the Wii U not doing so well, I think, changed the sort of scheduling Nintendo had for what they were doing. And I do think that the Wii U's failure obviously helped create the fantastic Nintendo Switch, so that was a really positive byproduct of the Wii U not doing very well. But because they released it at such an awkward time, things are kind of segmented and weird. And, you know, some people might want to argue that Nintendo can just ignore Sony and Microsoft completely, and they can just ignore the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Scarlet. And I get the thinking and the logic behind it. I really do. I don't think it's a crazy thought for people to have. But I do have to say that I don't really agree with it. I feel that Nintendo cannot ignore the fact that new next generation hardware is coming from their competition, Sony and Microsoft. And as I've also mentioned before, one of the big reasons is because third-party developers are going to move alongside of Sony and Microsoft here, right? I mean, if Nintendo was the one putting out the next generation machine before Sony or Microsoft, then it would be the same thing. I feel like some people maybe don't understand, or maybe they think it's a matter of just picking Sony and Microsoft over Nintendo or something, which is just completely not the case, and that's ludicrous. If you know me, you know I wouldn't do that. But I do think it's fair to say that that's what's going to happen. Sony and Microsoft moving to super next-gen powerful tech, that's what the third-party developers are going to do. And Nintendo has learned the valuable lesson of third-party support with the Switch and seen the benefits of it, and the developers are also seeing the same benefit. And so, yes, developers might still want to consider the great sales they're going to get from the Switch, but at some point they're going to realize we're developing games for this next-gen tech. We're developing stuff for the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlet, which dwarfs the Nintendo Switch, and honestly would probably dwarf a Nintendo Switch Pro as well. And so I think Nintendo can have a little bit of a buffer or a cushion for a year or two after the PS5 and Scarlet launch. But after that year or two, they're going to need to move on to something that's a little bit more on par with those consoles so that they can sort of still be, in the same race and have those third-party developers making their games for that console. If Nintendo doesn't move on to the successor soon after the PS5 and Xbox Scarlet, they're just going to get left in the dust from third parties. And sure, we'd still get amazing, incredible first-party Nintendo content, which is the best stuff on the market. And we'd get the occasional great third-party multiplat that's not really something special like a Just Dance or something dumb. And we'd get the occasional third-party exclusives. Those are all great, so I'm not trying to understate those, especially the first-party Nintendo stuff. But we also can't understate the third-party stuff, you guys. And they want to start getting more stuff like Doom and Elder Scrolls 6 and Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty and Resident Evils. Like, they're going to want to continue to get those games from those companies on their platform. And PS5 and Xbox Scarlet are going to be getting those games, and a current Nintendo Switch is not going to be getting those games. So when we look at the next generation that really is going to kick off next year, Nintendo has got to be paying attention. They've got to have a game plan, and my personal opinion and theory is that their game plan is by 2022, they're going to need to move on from the Switch and or Switch Pro onto their successor machine. Whether or not that's another hybrid or just a home console again or even a dedicated portable, who even knows? That is a mystery to be talked about and solved at another time, because we're still a good couple of years away from this happening anyway. Maybe once we get through the launch of the PS5 and Xbox Scarlet, we'll have that much more behind-the-scenes information or rumors about what Nintendo is planning to discuss. In fact, I almost guarantee that over the course of the next year, as rumors about PS5 and Scarlet start to get out there, I think rumors about Nintendo's next-gen machine will also start to become part of the conversation. Mark my words, 2020 is going to be the discussion about next-gen machines from all three companies, Nintendo included. And so I don't know. I'll have a lot of really fun conversations and topics to talk to you guys about, I think, throughout 2020 when it comes to Nintendo and the next generation. It's going to be pretty interesting, and I think it's going to be a blast. So these are my thoughts and theories for today, discussing Nintendo and the incoming next generation and how do they fit in this weird sort of goofy, messed up puzzle that is the video game console space, because it got all weird with the Wii U and then the PlayStation and the Xbox and then now the Switch, and now we've got incoming PS5 and Scarlet. It's crazy. It's all over the place, and I think we've just gotten to the point where dictating what generation we're in by number no longer matters. So saying 8th gen and 9th, 8th gen PlayStation 4, 9th gen Nintendo Switch, it doesn't really have the same meaning anymore. I think that things have changed, due in part to Nintendo's releasing of the Switch, to the point where next gen really is next gen. It's not 9th gen we're moving into, it's next gen. And so by thinking about it as current gen and next gen, suddenly the Switch being 9th gen doesn't matter. It's just really about what we're doing in the industry, what games are possible, what games first parties and third parties are developing for these machines, and that's what dictates when we're in a current generation or a new generation. So that's the way I see it right now. I'm sure there'll be some controversial takes here because I don't know if everyone's going to agree with me, but it's fun to discuss. I've obviously got a lot of opinions about it, and it's interesting to see. Nintendo always makes things really interesting and weird and different and exciting, and that's a good thing. That's one of the things we love about them. So you've heard my opinions. What are your opinions? What do you think about all this stuff in Nintendo in the next gen? Talk about it below, and with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.